Perfectionism is one of the sneakiest mindsets out there because it sounds like it should be a good thing, right? We think about it as really high standards or striving for excellence. But the gag is, perfectionism is running a scam. It actually has nothing to do with high standards at all. It's just cosplaying as that. And instead of helping you succeed, it quietly sabotages your progress. Remember, I said sneaky. So in this video, I'm breaking down 3 reasons why you might not think that you have a perfectionism problem. Meanwhile, it's your certified enemy of progress behind the scenes. Hey, I'm Kieran, career strategist, coach, and creator of The Possibility Pattern. This channel is all about swapping perfection for possibility and building our lives and careers around who we truly are. So if you've outgrown the version of success that you were taught to chase and you're ready for something that really feels like yours, you're in the right place. And if you're looking for something that you can do immediately to get unstuck and start moving forwards with clarity and courage, then take my 2-minute quiz. It'll help you figure out where you're getting stuck on your journey and how to move forward. Link is down below. All right, let's get into it. So let's talk about why you might not think that you have a perfectionism problem. Before you think, okay, this has nothing to do with me, I'm not a perfectionist, let me do some myth busting and break down exactly how perfectionism is tricking you into thinking that it's not your problem, while meanwhile running your whole show. So there are 3 myths that I'm gonna take you through today, and let's start with number 1. You confuse it with conscientiousness. A lot of what we think is perfectionism, the association that we have in our mind when we think about perfectionists, the discipline, the work ethic, the really high standards, the super organization, right? It's actually not perfectionism. That is conscientiousness. And on the surface, these two can look really similar, but underneath, totally different. So let's break it down. Let's imagine 2 people preparing for a presentation, okay? We're gonna call one Layla and we're gonna call one Maya. So on the surface, they are both taking this presentation very seriously. They've booked out time in their calendars to work on it. They're, really thinking carefully about the structure. They want to make a good impression. To anyone who was watching them, they both look like they've got it together and are, really focused on making sure that this presentation is as good as it can be. But what's underneath is where we see the key difference. So Layla's gonna be our conscientious baddie, okay? Layla is outlining her slides, she's practicing a couple times a week, and she's tweaking what she needs to tweak. She's thorough, she knows her material, and then she's ready. She does her presentation, and when it's done, she feels good. Even if it wasn't flawless, she really trusts that she showed up as her best. And once it's done, she closes her laptop, moves on with her day. Maya, on the other hand, is our perfectionist hand, and she has been obsessing over these slides. She's been working on the design for hours and hours. She keeps changing and iterating and tweaking. She rewrote her intro 4 times. She stayed up late practicing over and over again because it just didn't feel right. And during the presentation, she's not even present. She's distracted scanning for signs that she's not doing well. And she just can't get out of her head. She feels really stressed, she's anxious, and she just can't wait for it to be over. And when it's done, all she can think about is replaying over and over again the sentences that she stumbled over. And when she closes her laptop, she doesn't feel proud. She's just glad it's over. And instead of moving on, a part of her is already worrying about what she's gonna have to get right next. Hopefully you can see the difference between those 2 examples, that conscientiousness is about wanting to do things well, whereas perfectionism is about not wanting to be seen as imperfect. So you can see that actually what's happening with perfectionism is that it's all about fear. It's about managing your own fear because you are so afraid of being perceived and exposed as imperfect. Whereas conscientiousness doesn't have that same fear. Conscientiousness is about desire. It's about desire to do something well. Because we confuse perfectionism with conscientiousness, we think it's about excellence and high standards. And so this is the first place that we get tripped up. We think it's a worthwhile strategy for success. We think that's how people succeed, when actually, as we're going to see in myth number 2, that is not the case. Which brings us to the second reason why, and that is we think it helps us succeed. If I ask you right now to think of a perfectionist, I'm going to bet that, some celebrity is going to come to mind like Beyonce or Serena Williams, both of whom are self-confessed perfectionists. Because let's be honest, some of the worst perfectionists are also the most famous. And so part of you probably thinks, well, yeah, that's why you're Beyonce. That's why you are Serena, because you are a perfectionist. That type of excellence and achievement and level of success surely can only come from being a perfectionist. And so it sounds like it's a good thing. It sounds like it's how they succeeded, right? It's kind of like when people say things in interviews like, oh, my biggest weakness, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And on purpose, it's meant to sound like a flaw. You're admitting that this is one of your weaknesses. But at the same time, the implication is like, don't worry, it's going to work out in your favor. it's going to lead to greatness. You know, that of course there's a sacrifice and there's a trade-off here, but in exchange for, you know, the hard work of perfectionism, you get that power, the prestige, the success and the status. So because of these kinds of cultural myths about success and perfectionism, we assume that that's what it takes to succeed. And so if you were somebody who doesn't feel successful, or you feel like you're still figuring things out, or you still feel stuck, you might feel like, I'm not a perfectionist because I haven't been able to succeed in the way that, you know, these other people have been able to. But here's the part that I don't think that we question enough. What if perfectionism isn't something that made them great, but actually is something that they had to succeed in spite of? Because as we learned in myth 1, perfectionism isn't actually about striving for excellence. It's about protection. Protecting yourself from failure, from judgment, from disappointment, and the fear that as you are not good enough. And because it's about fear and it's about protecting, you know, fear of failure and fear of disappointment and fear of judgment and, you know, fear of being unworthy, it's actually a really great survival strategy. That is actually what it is. It's a survival strategy. But what it's not is a success strategy. And once you start to see that distinction between the survival strategy and the success strategy, it completely changes everything about the way that you see perfectionism. So yes, some of those people that we look up to and admire, like Beyonce or Serena, they succeeded and they have said that they are perfectionists. They likely also have a bunch of other things, which means that they were able to move through the fear to be able to take action towards their dreams anyway and succeed. So things like talent, things like confidence, the discipline, support system, to be able to move through the perfectionism to be able to still succeed, rather than succeed because of it. So it's survivor bias. We think that because they've been able to survive the perfectionism, that it must be because of the perfectionism, when actually it's the opposite. And the reality is that most people have a really hard time moving through the perfectionism, and so stay stuck there. So the truth is that perfectionism doesn't really drive success, it delays it, unless you have a bunch of other stuff working in your favor. Check out this clip from Virgil Abloh, who put it better than I could.
Once I realized that it's okay to not be a perfectionist, all of a sudden I can do a million things at once and like go to sleep at night.
And that, my loves, is exactly why this last myth matters so much. And that is the trick, that we think about it as a personality, but not ours. So usually when we're thinking about perfectionism, we think about it as something that we either are or aren't, right? So either I am a perfectionist or I'm not a perfectionist. And unless you match the, you know, the stereotype of the perfectionist personality, like the obsessive planner, or, you know, like the type A person in your group, or the A+ student, or, you know, being the Beyonce of your office, you might think, you know what, I don't see myself in any of that, and so I'm not a perfectionist. But actually, psychologist and professor Thomas Curran, who wrote this book called The Perfection Trap, talks about how it's not really as black and white as that. In fact, he actually talks about how it's not really binary at all, and is more of a spectrum. So rather than it being a question of am I or am I not a perfectionist, it's more a question of how much of a perfectionist am I, and how intensely do I experience it. He also describes it as more of a lens than a personality. So rather than it being like, you know, a fixed identity or a fixed personality, it's more of a worldview. It's more of like, you know, imagine if you're, you know, putting on glasses. So you know how they talk about, you know, rose tinted glasses? It's more like that. It's more like perfectionism tinted glasses, like a filter through which you see the world and you see yourself, which is really important, because the final thing to think about with this is that it's not actually just about you. We often, again, think about perfectionism as being very individual, about something I am or not. But it's actually, as he describes in the book, it's a relational trait, which means that it's not just about how you see yourself or how you experience the world. It also shapes how you interact with others and your relationships with others. So I see this all the time with clients who may not have identified as perfectionists because from the outside may not match the stereotypical idea of what a perfectionist personality looks like. But on the inside, it is a filter which is affecting the way that they see themselves and they see the world. So ways that this, you know, will show up is, for example, overworking and getting burnt out, but not actually making any progress or moving ahead in their career, or not applying for jobs unless they tick every single box on the job description, turning down high visibility projects or not putting their hand up for high visibility projects, endlessly tweaking things instead of finishing and completing things, and avoiding new things unless success feels like it's completely guaranteed. And this is why it's so sneaky. You can see here that what they're actually doing is not necessarily going for high standards as we would stereotypically think of perfectionism. What they're actually doing is avoiding being seen as imperfect in any way, which is what perfectionism is really about. That avoidance of being seen as imperfect is exactly the reason why perfectionism is not a flex, it's a cage. So if by this point you are low-key starting to feel like, wait a minute, Have I been running an undercover perfectionist strategy this whole time and I didn't even realize it? Then, babe, welcome to the club, okay? But the gag is that you are not locked in. Check out this other clip from Virgil.
Perfectionism doesn't advance anything, ironically. There's no wrong way to go about the future of your career. The only failure is not to try.
And so you can do it differently. Because it's a lens, just like your sunglasses, you can swap them. And there is so much possibility on the other side of letting go of this perfectionist filter. And the first step in doing that is recognizing what it's really costing you to be running this perfectionist strategy. Because listen, this lens is shaping the way that you work, the way that you move through the world, the way that you rest, the way that you see yourself, the way that you see others. And so chances are it is costing you more than you think. And that is exactly what we're going to be unpacking in the next video. So you can click here for the next video in the series on the hidden cost of perfectionism. And if you're not subscribed yet, then hit subscribe so that you don't miss any of the other videos in the series. And let me know in the comments which myth made you feel the most called out. I know for me, it was number 2 was the game changer. Let's jump over. I'll see you in the next one.